A company begins with a document, not a cannon, not a battlefield, not a crown placed on a king's head. Document. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to a group of English merchants. The company was created to trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. Spices, textiles, tea, silver, ships, ledgers. At first, this sounds like a business story. A few investors, a risky voyage, a chance to make profit. But hidden inside the charter was something stranger. The East India Company was not just a group of merchants. It was a legal invention, a corporation that could act as one body, a body that could outlive its founders, a body that could raise money, make contracts, hold privileges, and eventually exercise powers that looked more like a state than a shop. This is not a story about trade. It is a story about how legal fiction became imperial power. The first great gift was monopoly. The Crown gave the company exclusive rights over English trade in a huge part of the world. That meant other English merchants could not simply compete there. The state cleared the field. One favored company received the roof. This mattered because ocean trade was dangerous. A ship could sink, cargo could rot, pirates could attack. A voyage could fail before any profit returned. So the company used a joint stock model. Many investors pooled money together. One person did not have to pay for the whole ship. Many people bought pieces of the risk. Think of it like a huge voyage paid for by many pockets. The investor could stay safely in London. The sailor faced the storm. The shareholder faced limited financial loss. The ship carried the real danger. This was the genius of the form. Risk was spread. Capital became larger. And private investors could fund voyages too expensive for one merchant alone. A voyage to Asia was not like sending a cart to the next town. It required ships, crews, weapons, silver, warehouses, agents, maps, insurance, and patience. Money might be locked away for years before returning. The joint stock company solved that problem. It made long-distance trade financially possible at a new scale. But this was not a free market story. The company's scale depended on public privilege. The Crown gave legal protection. The company pursued private profit. That bargain sat at the heart of the system. Public power created private opportunity. The East India Company became a corporate body. That phrase sounds dull, but it is powerful. A single merchant dies. A partnership breaks, but a corporation can continue. It can sign, sue, borrow, lobby, fight, and survive beyond the lives of the people who created it. A legal person had been born, and this legal person would eventually rule real people. From the beginning, the company carried the seeds of sovereignty. Sovereignty means the power normally held by a state, the power to command, to punish, to defend, to make rules, to use force. The East India Company's charter allowed more than buying and selling. It could make war under certain conditions. It could build fortifications, could govern its own settlements. It could enforce order. This did not mean the company immediately became an empire. For much of its early history, it operated as a trading enterprise. It depended on permission from powerful Asian states, especially the Mughal Empire. But the legal tools were already there. A ledger could sit beside a cannon. A merchant could travel with soldiers. A warehouse could become a fort. The company did not first trade in peace, and then accidentally discover power centuries later. Power was built into the way it traded. Trade needed walls. That is one of the simplest ways to understand the early company. Its goods were valuable. Its voyages were long. Its rivals were many. So warehouses became protected. Protected warehouses became fortified posts. Fortified posts needed guards. Guards needed rules. Rules needed courts. And soon the company was not just storing goods, it was managing people. Money also touched sovereignty. To mint coins is not a small power. Money carries authority. It tells people what can be trusted, what can settle a debt, what can move through markets. When a corporation touches coinage, law, courts, and forts, it is no longer just a merchant. It is entering the territory of government. This is the strange pattern. The East India Company did not begin by declaring an empire. It began by solving commercial problems: security, payment, disputes, warehouses. But each solution made it more state-like. In 1613, the company established a permanent factory at Surat. But factory did not mean an industrial factory. It meant a trading post, a warehouse, an office, a place where company agents bought goods, stored goods, recorded goods, and negotiated with local merchants. Surat mattered because it gave the company a durable foothold in India. But it was not conquest. The company operated inside a larger Indian political world. Mughal authority was still powerful. Indian merchants were skilled. Indian textiles were highly valued. European traders often needed silver because Asian goods were more desirable than what Europe could easily sell back. So the early trade was simple to picture. Silver went in. Textiles, spices, and other goods came out. The company depended on Indian producers, brokers, rulers, and permissions. At this stage, it was still a guest inside a much larger system, but it was a guest with guns, ships, and a royal charter behind it. The company's world was built from two objects, a ledger and a cannon. The ledger recorded the trade, the cannon protected it. At first, the cannon looked like insurance, a way to defend ships, a way to protect warehouses, a way to keep rivals away. But protection can change character. If you build walls, you need guards. If you hire guards, you need commanders. If you have commanders, you begin making military decisions. If you make military decisions, local politics becomes impossible to avoid. Over time, the company built a coastal network. Surat, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta. Each was more than a dot on a map. Each was a warehouse, a dock, a settlement, a legal space, a military foothold. The company was not yet a territorial empire, but it had anchors, and those anchors would later hold a much larger structure. Madras showed how a warehouse could become a fortified town. Trade goods sat behind walls. Company officials worked beside guards. Commercial space and military space began to overlap. Bombay gave the company a strategic harbor. A harbor is not just water. It is repair, supply, navigation, protection. A safe harbor makes trade more predictable, and predictability is power. Calcutta opened a path into Bengal. Bengal was one of the richest regions in the subcontinent. Textiles, river routes, dense agriculture, sophisticated merchants. If Madras showed fortified trade and Bombay showed naval strategy, Calcutta showed something more tempting: access to wealth inland. At each step, the company's footprint deepened. It began with coastal trade, but ports connected to rivers, rivers connected to markets, markets connected to rulers, and rulers connected to war. The Indian Ocean was already a busy world. Arab merchants, Indian merchants, Armenian merchants, Southeast Asian traders, Portuguese, Dutch, French, and English companies. The East India Company entered this world late. It had to compete. Its ships were not ordinary merchant ships. East Indiamen carried cargo and guns. Tea chests could sit near cannon. Textile bales could sit near gunpowder. A ship could be a warehouse and a war platform at the same time. European rivalry pushed this further. The Dutch were rivals, the French were rivals, the Portuguese had come before. Each company wanted routes, warehouses, privileges, and influence. So trade became contested, and contested trade became militarized. This is an important point. The company did not militarize only because India was unstable. It also militarized because European empire was a competition. Commerce became armed because profit was protected by force. Still, early company power had limits. The company needed permission. It needed farmhands. It needed local agreements. It needed brokers. It needed weavers. It needed bankers. It needed rulers who allowed it to trade. The Mughal Empire was not a background decoration. It was the political world in which the company operated. Indian producers were not passive. Bengal's weavers made goods Europeans desperately wanted. Indian bankers could finance armies and trade. Indian officials could grant or deny privileges. That is why the early company was dependent. It had ships, it had money, it had weapons, but it did not yet control the land. Then the political world changed. The Mughal Empire began to fracture. Regional powers grew stronger. Military competition intensified, and the company's armed trade found a new opening. Commerce was learning the language of force. Soon, it would speak that language fluently. The Mughal Empire had once been one of the greatest powers in the world, but by the 18th century, its authority was weakening. A major shock came in 1739 when the Persian ruler Nadir Shah sacked Delhi. The event damaged more than a city. It damaged the image of imperial power. The old center no longer looked untouchable. Across India, regional states grew more independent. Nawabs, Marathas, Nizams, local rulers, military households, court factions. The political map became more fragmented. This did not mean India was empty or weak. It meant power was contested. Many centers competed. Many armies moved. Many rulers needed money. Many bankers financed politics. In this world, the East India Company saw opportunity. It did not conquer a unified empire in one blow. It entered a fractured political landscape and learned to profit from the cracks. In 18th century India, military labor could be hired. Soldiers moved between employers. Commanders changed sides. Rulers needed trained troops. The company adapted to this world. It recruited Indian soldiers known as sepoys. They were local men, but they fought under company command, often with British officers and European-style drill. The company's advantage was not only weapons, it was finance, regular pay matters. A soldier who is not paid may desert. An army without cash loses discipline. The company could use credit, revenue promises, and merchant finance to pay troops more reliably than many local rulers. That made the sepoy army more dependable. A musket needs a hand needs a wage needs a ledger. Behind every army is a payment system. This is one of the hidden systems of conquest. The company's military power grew from accounting, credit, and regular salaries. Bankers were not background characters. They moved power. Credit could feed armies. Credit could keep soldiers paid. Credit could decide which ruler survived. Indian bankers, including major banking houses, financed political struggle. The company learned to work inside this financial world. It could offer troops. It could intervene in disputes. It could support one claimant against another. In exchange, it received money, land, privileges, or revenue promises. This made the company a military entrepreneur. It sold force into politics. The guard at the trading post became something much larger. Barracks, payrolls, artillery, commanders, supply chains. A private army began to grow from commercial protection. By 1803, the company's army would reach roughly 250,000 to 260,000 men, about twice the size of the British government's own standing army. A corporation now commanded an army larger than many states. Power had a payroll. That is the key. The company did not rule because it had courage. It ruled because it could organize money, soldiers, contracts, and political opportunity. Bengal became the great prize. It was wealthy. It had textiles, revenue, river networks, bankers, dense agriculture. To control Bengal was not simply to control land. It was to control a financial engine, but the company did not move unchallenged. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, resisted company power. He challenged unauthorized fort building. He challenged abuses of trading privileges. he saw that a foreign company was becoming too strong inside his territory. This moment is important. The conflict was not simply British order against Indian disorder. It was a local ruler trying to limit a corporation that was expanding beyond trade. Then came the turning point. Plassey. Plassey is often remembered as a battle, but the battle was decided before the battlefield. Robert Clive and company agents built secret agreements. Mir Jafar, a commander under the Nawab, became central to the conspiracy. Powerful bankers, including the Jagat Seths, also played a major role. Money, credit, and betrayal entered the field before soldiers fired. This does not mean military force did not matter. It did. The company had trained troops, weapons, discipline, command. But Plassey was not won by battlefield strength alone. It was won through a combination of force, bribery, finance, and treason. On the field, some forces held back. Political loyalty had already been purchased. After Plassey in 1757, the company installed Mir Jafar as a puppet ruler. A merchant company had learned how to change a government. That was the real victory. After Plassey, power changed hands. The company did not yet directly collect every tax, but it had gained decisive influence over Bengal. It could place a ruler, demand payments, extract privileges, open treasuries. Political victory became cash. Robert Clive and other company men gained enormous fortunes. Company officials enriched themselves through gifts, private trade, bribes, and political pressure. The Bengal treasury became a source of corporate and personal wealth. But Plassey was not the end. Buxar came in 1764. There, the company defeated a broader coalition of Indian powers. This mattered because it moved the company beyond palace manipulation. It showed that company military power could defeat major political forces in the open. After Buxar, the company was no longer simply a coastal trader with influence. It was becoming a territorial power. The next step would change everything. In 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad gave the company the Diwani. The Diwani meant the right to collect revenue, taxes, land revenue, the fiscal heart of government. The company received revenue rights over Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This was the decisive mutation. A merchant company became a tax collector. The trade ledger was pushed aside. The tax ledger opened. Before this, the company often needed silver from Europe to buy Indian goods. After this, it could use Indian tax revenue to finance trade. Taxes collected from Indian peasants could pay for the company army. The army could secure more power. That power could protect more revenue. Revenue could buy Indian goods. Those goods could be sold in Europe for profit. This was no longer simple trade. It was a machine. Taxes, army, goods, exports, dividends, empire. A map can make this look simple. Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, colored regions on paper. But those colors represented villages, fields, crops, families, artisans, merchants, local officials. The company converted living territory into revenue administration. Tax collectors gathered money. Clerks recorded it. Company officials moved it. Sepoys were paid from it. Guns were bought from it. Ships were loaded because of it. This is how trade became empire. The company did not need to conquer everything at once. It needed a revenue base. Once it had that, military power could feed on taxation. The old problem of trade had been silver. How do we pay for Asian goods? The new answer was Indian revenue. India began financing the purchase of its own exports. That is the brutal elegance of the company state. Someone always pays for empire. In Bengal, peasants faced heavy revenue pressure. Company officials and revenue intermediaries demanded payments from the countryside. Land taxes rose sharply in some accounts, and the burden became severe. For villagers, empire was not an abstract map. It was a tax demand, a ledger, a seal, a collector at the door. Weavers also paid the price. Bengal's textile workers were skilled and valuable. But once the company gained monopoly power, buyers could become masters. Company agents could pressure producers. Advance payments could become control. Prices could be forced downward. A skilled weaver could become dependent on a single buyer. Meanwhile, far away in London, shareholders waited for dividends. They did not see the village. They did not hear the loom. They saw revenue, stock, profit. A company can create distance between those who gain and those who suffer. That distance was one of its powers. Then came the Bengal famine of 1770. We need to speak carefully here. Famines have environmental causes: drought, crop failure, food scarcity. But many historians argue that company revenue pressure, grain policies, and the drive to protect profit worsened the disaster. The death toll is debated. Estimates range widely, from around 1 million to many millions. The exact number is hard. The moral pattern is clearer. A corporation responsible to shareholders was also ruling a population. That is a dangerous combination. The East India Company had become a company state. Merchant, tax collector, soldier, judge, diplomat, administrator, all under one corporate seal. And the scale was enormous. A handful of men in London and company officials in India were connected to the lives of tens of millions of people. A business form had become a system of rule. The company did not only transform India, it transformed Britain. Company officials returned home with fortunes. They became known as nabobs. Some bought estates. Some bought influence. Some bought parliamentary seats. Wealth extracted in India entered British politics. This alarmed many observers. It raised a disturbing question. What happens when a corporation can buy influence inside the state that created it? The overlap was deep. Many members of Parliament held East India Company stock. Their personal wealth could be tied to the company's success. Company decisions affected British finance. British policy protected company interests. The line between private profit and public law became blurred. The company was not outside the British state. It was entangled with it. The state gave it privileges. The company gave the state money, trade, loans, customs revenue, and imperial reach. It was a public-private machine, and it was becoming hard to control. The East India Company became an early master of corporate lobbying. It used money, connections, gifts, and political access to protect its privileges. This was not a cartoon conspiracy. It was a system of influence. The company became too important to ignore, too rich to offend, too connected to easily discipline, and eventually, too big to fail. In 1772, the company faced a financial crisis. Military costs, corruption, famine, and unstable revenues strained its finances. It needed rescue from the British state. A company that had ruled millions now needed a bailout. Adam Smith attacked this kind of monopoly power in The Wealth of Nations. He saw monopoly as a burden on the public. He distrusted directors managing other people's money. He believed merchant and sovereign were dangerous roles to combine. A merchant seeks profit. A sovereign should protect a society. The East India Company tried to be both. Smith warned that the mixture corrupted trade and government. Smith's phrase was simple in spirit. Directors were playing with other people's money. Shareholders took risks at a distance. Managers pursued ventures far away. Company employees made private fortunes. The structure encouraged negligence, waste, and corruption. But Smith's deeper criticism was political. A merchant sovereign is almost a contradiction. If a ruler governs for long-term prosperity, they must care about the people who live under them, their land, their wages, their security, their future. But a company is designed for profit. That does not make every merchant evil. It means the incentives are different. Edmund Burke made the moral accusation sharper. He attacked the company as a state disguised as a merchant. He feared not only what the company did in India, he feared what Indian plunder did to Britain. A corrupt empire abroad could corrupt democracy at home. The company state was dangerous in both directions. Parliament began to intervene. The Regulating Act of 1773 marked the beginning of stronger oversight. The company was not dissolved immediately. Its power was too useful, too profitable, too deeply connected to British interests. But the state began reaching inside the company. Over the next decades, Parliament reduced its autonomy. The company lost trade monopolies. Its commercial role shrank. Its administrative role grew. Then came 1857. A massive rebellion shook company rule. It began with sepoy unrest, but expanded into a larger crisis of authority. The causes were many: military grievances, religious fears, political annexations, economic pressures, deep resentment of company rule. After the rebellion, the British government decided the company could no longer govern India. In 1858, the Crown took over. Company rule ended. The corporation had become too powerful, too unstable, and too dangerous to remain sovereign. The East India Company was finally dissolved in 1874. The legal machine that began with a charter ended as paperwork. A seal, a box of records, a closed office. But its pattern did not disappear completely. Modern corporations are not the East India Company. This matters. Modern companies do not legally rule tens of millions of people as sovereigns. They do not command sepoy armies. They do not collect land taxes in the name of empire. They do not formally wage wars like the EIC did. But the echoes are familiar. Monopoly power, corporate lobbying, state dependence, government rescue, political influence, private profit protected by public power. The East India Company shows what can happen when a legal fiction borrows the powers of a state. A charter became a monopoly. A monopoly funded ships. Ships needed forts. Forts needed soldiers. Soldiers needed taxes. Taxes built an empire. The invisible pattern is this: trade did not simply become empire because merchants wanted profit. It became empire because law, capital, violence, and state power were fused into one corporate machine.